Okay, good morning, everybody. This is John Haller. I have with me this morning, I'm just going to wait a second or so until we get, make sure we've got everybody connected and the sound is operating. Um, it's always a little bit, it's always a little bit difficult because the YouTube Jonathan operates on about a 10 or 15-second delay. So, but it looks like we're going. So, if anybody can hear, you give me a thanks up, and I see one of my moderators is here and that type of thing. So this is John Haller from Fellowship Bible Chapel in the Columbus, Ohio area. And I have this morning, I'm going to try this as the first, Jonathan, you're the first one that I've tried this with. We're going to do a live interview. And I have with me Jonathan Feldstein, who is a journalist in Israel. And Jonathan, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, just by saying, yeah, sure, you hear my American accent. I was born and raised and educated in the United States, went to Emory University. I'm about to write an article calling to task the president of Emory, who's not quite as bad as the president of the Ivy Leagues, but who's been saying some things that have not been accurate. Grew up in New Jersey, began my family there, and in August of 2004, we packed up our then 5 kids and our house and moved to Israel. So we're not quite 20 years. We now have a 18-year-old who's pre-army and 5 other kids, 2 who are married, 3 grandchildren. I'm the president of the Genesis 123 Foundation, which is the context in which I was invited, also that I'm a journalist, to the Christian Media Summit where we met last year, John. And Genesis 123 Foundation has as its mission to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new, unique, and meaningful. I will simply invite people to go to the website genesis123.co and check out what we do, but it's a wide range of amazing projects because I believe in relations, not transactional relationships. And I do, as you noted, I write a great deal. I've been under the moniker this year, this war, that my words are my weapon, and I've lost count of how many interviews I've done and how many articles I've written and how many briefings I've given and prayer events in which I've participated. But if my son is on the front line, if my son-in-law is on the front line and they're not getting much sleep, I will also sacrifice a little bit and use my best skill, which is my words. That's who I am.
So Jonathan and I were talking before, and I met Jonathan a year ago when I was at the Christian Media Summit, and we actually spent a little time together. We went over to the Knesset one day, and we were there. We'd gone down to the city of David. I don't remember if you were down in the city of David and the Pool of Siloam. Amazing morning. And then we went over to the Knesset in the afternoon, and we talked a little bit. I remember talking to you in the hallway out there around lunchtime, and that was exactly a year ago. In fact, a year ago today, I don't think Jonathan was on this part of the summit, but we went down to the Gaza border. We went down to the base down there where they have the Urban Warfare Training Center. We had a briefing from a general. I don't remember his name. I remember he had red hair. And he showed us a tank, and then they took us over to the Urban Warfare Training Center, and then we went over to Niram, and then we went to I want to say Eshkon community for dinner. Amazing day, and it really, with the events of October 7th, and I want to talk about that, it's brought into focus, and that just so happens to be exactly 1 year ago today that I was there. So kind of just tell us, Jonathan, what October 7th and what's happened and how people have reacted and what you've seen in Israel.
Yeah, so October 7th, I mean, you know this, and everyone following, was a brutal, vicious, everything about it, premeditated attack. The more we're hearing now that's coming out from victims, from hostages, the more vulgar the stories are. But it was a shock to us all. I live in a town in the Judean Mountains about 40 miles north and east of the Gaza border. It's unusual to have rockets come here, but we were very rudely awakened that morning. The window behind me has an air raid siren on top of a school, so that jolted us out of bed. That was one of, I think, 4. We knew something bad was going on, but as Orthodox Jews, because it was not life-threatening to us at that moment, we didn't turn on the phones. We didn't turn on the TV. we speculated a lot, and we spent a lot of time that day in the bomb shelter until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when my 25-year-old son, who is celebrating his birthday tomorrow, came home. He's also a newlywed. He's been living at his in-laws' house, who are friends and neighbors of ours. And he said, yeah, there was an attack. He told us at the time they believed about 100 people were killed. That was all that was known at that point. And he had 10 minutes to get out of the house, change into his uniform, pick up his gear, and he had a ride and went off to war. And thank God we've seen him several times. And he only went into Gaza this week for the first time. They've been waiting, and he's in, and we're not in touch. We don't know exactly where he is, but we have a general idea on what he's doing. He's a combat soldier. That evening, my son-in-law, who's also a combat officer, went in reserves. We knew he would be called up immediately. He was told to hold back because the base that he works out of was overtaken for a period by the terrorists, and some people were killed there. So he didn't go in until that evening. And look, since then, we've been a country at one side grieving, angry, frustrated, sad, and at the same time, we've seen a resilience, and we've seen a sense of unity and togetherness that's simply unprecedented. It's inspiring, and thank God for that, because truthfully, if we only had the grief and the anger, it would be a very hard place, a much harder place to live right now.
It's the change in sort of the resolve of people to, because when I was there a year ago, everything was incredibly divided.
Yes.
They were forming the government. The Knesset was already meeting, but there was a lot of tension over at the Knesset. And and there were a lot of protests over the last year. I've been following that. I've been talking a lot about that on the updates that I do, a lot of which revolve around Israel, because I think it's such a significant harbinger of everything in the world. And so just sort of describe a little bit how that whole spirit of division and everything has changed, or what you've observed in that
As
regard.
divided as we were, and I think it's fair to say we were more divided in this previous year up until October 7th than ever before in our history. There have been other instances, we could talk about that, but very, very divided. As divided as we were, we are equally, if not more, unified right now, and that really runs the spectrum of right and left. When I was down in the Gaza border today with my friend Pastor Trey Graham from Melissa, Texas, who was at the Christian Media Summit with you and us last year as well. So he made the observation that the communities that we were on the outside of tend to be very liberal, left-wing, secular communities. And I corrected him. I said, formerly left-wing. We've seen a lot of people pivoting to the right. But the unity is encouraging. It may not stay as unified because there's still 130 or 140 hostages who are taken, and many of their relatives want them out at any cost. And that any cost is very dangerous, and that can become divisive. And politics are creeping in because now, 2 months into the war, more people are looking at where the faults were and what the faults were of the current prime minister, and a budget that was passed that was probably not the best wartime budget that was passed. So there's a little bit of unraveling of things, but the army, when we were down there today seeing soldiers, tremendous strength and unity.
Well, that's encouraging. You mentioned a little bit about some of the, I guess I would say, recriminations or people starting to analyze what happened on October 7th. And do you have a perspective on that you can share with us?
Look, there was a massive, there have been, I love the fact that how people before this were saying Israel's not democratic or risk losing its democratic status because of some legislation that was being proposed. Israel's hyper democratic, and for the fact that even amid the war that we're in, the media is being quite vocal in terms of where some legitimate blame is laid. There were reports that were written. This is now public, written by soldiers in the 8200 unit, which is the major intelligence division, that were disregarded by some senior officers. Who's leaking this, by the way, gets very political, but it's obvious that these are facts, and it may be that the divisiveness in the government was contributory to the lack of preparedness, both in terms of the intelligence and the military ability to respond even quicker. I mean, where we were today at the site of the music festival, where 370 young men and women were slaughtered, and many of the women brutally gang raped, and other kinds of horrific sexual related violence that was taking place against them. Remember, in one spot, about a quarter of the total people who were massacred were killed. If that hadn't been taking place that day, we would have seen numbers that were somewhat smaller, but there was an intelligence failure, there was a military failure, and there was a failure, I think, in the lack of ability to conceive that such evil could happen. That won't happen again, not in our lifetimes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the impact that it's had on people here or there in Israel. I know that there's been, the numbers I see are somewhere around 200,000 people have been evacuated from their homes.
Correct.
Maybe 80,000 in the south and 120,000 in the north. What impact is that having? I mean, Israel's not a huge country.
No.
And
No,
how is that being handled?
So yesterday I had a meeting in a Jerusalem hotel, and I walked in immediately and I knew it was a hotel that's housing evacuees. And I asked and found out where they were from, some from the north and some from the south. The good news is, while tourists are not coming, the hotels are often full with people who've been evacuated. So at least that part of our economy, the hotels, but not the tourism business, has not suffered as much. But the economy is suffering. You have about 15% of the workforce that's now in the army, including, I think you know this, but on the first day of the war, 300,000 reservists were called up. That's a lot of people. That's shy of 5% of the population, but 360,000 showed up. And so you have people who are not working. My daughter's boyfriend, for instance, was out for a week. He's now in and out, alternating weeks. But what that means is he can't work, he can't study, and you have this impact. You have agricultural impact, where we witnessed it today. Fruit, we went by a grapefruit orchard, and you see so much of the fruit just falling to the ground because 30,000 foreign workers who were working in agriculture fled. And so the economic trickle down is wide, and unfortunately, John, I think it will be widespread even well into 24.
Yeah, I've heard from people there that initially they told people in the south, and so the day we were there a year ago today, we were at Niram, which is one of the closest kibbutzes to the border fence. And I've heard from people down in that area that they were initially told maybe 3 months before they would come back, and now some people are getting information it could be a couple of years before they get back. And I follow a lady, and I can't remember her name. She runs the Alma research in the north.
Okay.
And she had a very good blog post the other day. It's israel-alma.org, I think is their website. And she made a very good point yesterday, is we're not a big country. We have to be able to live from border to border, and we have to be able to live securely. And right now we can't do that.
Right.
Because, Kiryat Shimona, I think, what's that, 25,000 people. I think there's maybe 3,000 people left in that
Yeah.
city.
So I experienced that today, John. I took Pastor Trey Graham to Sderot, which is the city on the city that's literally on the border, a kilometer away.
About
And
how big is Sderot?
about 30,000, and it's
Okay.
grown a lot. It's grown a lot in the last decade, which meant people didn't believe that there would be a slaughter. But today, Sderot was a ghost town. Most businesses, I would say 90% of businesses that we drove by, including entire malls, bakeries, grocery stores, were shuttered. And the conversation we had coming back, here was, well, is it really dangerous, or is it just scary? Can people go back? But will they go back? Because if they don't go, they won't go back if the grocery stores aren't open, and if the schools are not open, and the schools aren't going to open, and the grocery stores aren't going to open if the people don't come back. So it's kind of like a evil chicken and egg thing. When are they going to come back to live in these neighborhoods? Because right now in Sderot, there's still the fear of rockets coming over. They're being fired dozens a day, and we get those alerts. But there's not any immediate threat of combat in the city. But it was a ghost town today, and how that will recover and when, I don't have a crystal ball.
Mm-hmm. It's and the economic impact is just you have I've been sort of analyzing it in my mind. I'm a lawyer, and so I was a trial lawyer, and so I sort of probably overanalyze things a lot of times. And I'm looking at the cost of the war,
Yeah.
and then the economic cost that, like you said, 5% or more of the population's now in the IDF, and the question is, how long is that going to go? And I know that they're spread out. I mean, you have the situation in the south, but then of course you have these Hezbollah things going on in the north. And what's your observations about what's going on up in the north?
Hezbollah is playing with us. They are firing, I guess, what they or we believe is an acceptable number of rockets, but we strike back. But those acceptable number of rockets that have yet to draw anyone into a full scale attack against Hezbollah and their positions, or a full scale launch of what was previously estimated 150,000 missiles, not low grade rockets, but actual precision missiles that they have. They're calculating not to do it yet, and we're calculating not to go in on a preemptive basis or ratchet up so that they'll fire. But the northern front is a tremendously dangerous front, especially because they have missiles, that can hit pretty much anywhere in Israel with precision. If they wanted to right now, as I'm speaking to you, they could take me out through the window that's behind me.
Are people surprised that they haven't responded more forcefully?
Some are, some aren't. It may not be this round, or it may be the Hail Mary operation that Iran orders them to do something, if they'll follow orders from Iran and unleash hell on Israel when we're on the verge of after we've wiped out their leaders in Gaza. Any scenario is possible. I don't think that we have intelligence. Of course, I don't know it, but I don't think we have intelligence on knowing what's holding them back. It could be that the Eisenhower is sitting in the Mediterranean, although that might be more bark than bite. I don't know. I hope we don't never find out, because I would hate to think that the U.S. Air Force is sitting a few miles off the coast and is just growling and not prepared to do something. But I don't really know.
Is there a feeling, sort of a general feeling, as to how the relationship between the United States and Israel is going?
I think that generally people feel that the response has been good. That there have been unequivocal statements in support of Israel, and I credit President Biden for coming here as he did, flying in and flying out as quick as he did. I'm not a big fan of the administration, but there's some things that they've done well, and there's some things that they've done that have been abysmal. And we're looking at the abysmal. We're grateful for the good things, but we're looking at the abysmal. We're looking at the nonsense of Kamala Harris talking about 2 states for 2 people under the authority of the Palestinian Authority. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Revitalizing the Palestinian Authority.
It is ridiculous if it was ever a model that could work when before this became the Islamic war that it is, when it was just a war like we had 50 years ago that was nationalist against Egypt and against Syria. If there could have been, forget the fact that the Palestinians and the Arabs have never really accepted 2 states and they've never taken the opportunity. Now that's not an option. Now there are no players. There are no leaders in the Palestinian Arab community who are not terrorists. And we cannot give over land for a state to be governed by a terrorist entity. We see what's happened in the last 2 decades in Gaza alone. So when they say that, it sounds foolish and it sounds like a great lack of vision. I'd love for a US president, whether it's Biden or anyone else, to come up with a real solution to help us, because we do need peace. We do need to, and we need to bring them to the realization that what happened October 7th is the last time that will ever happen. A, because it's inhuman, and B, because it doesn't work. It won't get them anything toward any goal of self-determination of any sort. If they don't ever grasp that, then we need help from the United States and the West to just blot it out. Blot it out.
So over the past couple of years, I've worked a little bit with General Amir Avivi, retired Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who founded the IDSF, the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, and some of the people there. And he's been doing regular briefings and everything. But one of the things I remember early in the process when I was trying to help raise IDSF's profile in the Christian community a little bit was the concern about sort of this underlying current of like the pot ready to boil in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And has that changed any that you've been able to see since the beginning of this on October 7th?
I think actually, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, Hamas must be terribly disappointed that their minions in Hebron and Ramallah and Nablus and Jericho and Qalqilia and all of these other cities where the Palestinian Authority has largely exclusive control. Bethlehem, which is a straight shot from where I live, that Hamas we've not seen massive protests. I think that's undermined them. But I will also say that living in Judea and living closer to an Arab community half a mile from my bathroom window, with no fence between us, there's been a lot of reconsidering whether we ever want Arab workers back in our community. I wrote an article about that a few weeks ago called "Muhammad, You're Fired." And that's another for a different conversation, John, but that's a fascinating aspect of this, because the economic impact, as much as it's impacting Israel, is also trickling down in the Palestinian Arab economy, because we're a third of their economy.
And so those workers are not coming. I mean, there were 20,000 workers coming in from Gaza on a semi-regular basis.
From Gaza alone, and where I live, where I live, I joked that and I took Trey Graham there today. It's an empty dirt lot that used to be what Americans would call a commuter lot. People drive their cars to the point where they get out of the cars and commute to work. And for us, they could walk. Okay, it's that close. And they do. They come through a security. There has not been, I look at it every day, I have not seen a single car of a Palestinian Arab coming to work now in 2 months. And there are many people, my neighbors, my wife, who says, no more. We're not hiring Omar. We're not hiring Ahmed. We're not hiring Muhammad. We're not hiring Faris. We're not hiring any of these people to ever come in our homes again, because even if they're nice, peaceful people, nothing is to prevent Hamas from threatening them to do something to us at the or they're going to get their own wives and children killed. And that's assuming that they're good people. And I can no longer vouch for that, sadly.
Yeah. I mean, I think on, I don't know if it was on WhatsApp or what, one day you post in the Christian Media Summit group on WhatsApp
Yeah.
that we have, you posted a terrorist attack that took place at a checkpoint. And I think that's probably the checkpoint that you use when you go from where you live up to Jerusalem, right?
Correct.
And just tell us what happened there that day. And
2 terrorists, very heavily armed, drove up to a checkpoint. I passed through there about 2-3 hours later, and the road was still wet for where they had to clean the blood. They were spotted. They opened fire. As I remember, 6 Israeli soldiers were injured, 1 killed. And there were people in a bus next door that were reciting psalms out loud, praying, and filming the carnage at the same time. And these 2 terrorists were so armed to the teeth, of course, because they were killed, no one knows for sure, but it was believed that they were trying to get through the checkpoint to commit an even bigger terror attack in Jerusalem. And had they gotten through, they would have succeeded. But we're on very high alert here. And
wasn't a border guard killed in that attack?
Yeah. A young man, an Ethiopian Israeli. Yeah, about 20 years old.
How has that impacted you? I follow Caroline Glick, who also I think lives down around where you live, and
yes,
I think she's really kind of come into her own, doing a lot more podcasts and getting a lot more traction. But she had on, I know Jeremy Gimpel and Ari Abramowitz, and Jeremy's was his sister-in-law, and she was one of the people who had just started preparing bodies for burial, and she was on. And I think the video that Caroline, or the interview that Caroline did with her, where she was just, I'm a mother of 6 kids, and I go to prepare these bits and pieces of bodies that have been brought back. But the funeral thing, I mean, how does this impact the community? I mean, is sort of like the sense of death present everywhere you go?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Look, the answer, I think if we're doing it well, the answer is yes. And by that I mean we can't not pay attention to every life that's been lost here. And it's a haunting thing. But every morning at 6 a.m., I don't sleep anymore, so I'm up anyway. But at 6 a.m., I'm watching the news, and that's when the Army clears for publication the names of the soldiers who were killed the previous day, once the families have been informed. If we don't shed a tear for every one of them, even if we don't go to the funerals, then we're not doing it right. Then we're not honoring them, and then we're not realizing that it's on our back door. And I fear that personally, having a son in.
So
yeah,
I appreciate that. I want to, and I know I promised to keep this to about 30 minutes, so I wanted to go just a little bit over.
Sure.
Because something you mentioned before we talk. So the people that are listening, I was in Israel a year ago, and before I left, I had been invited down to, I don't know if I should say their name, Yishai and Malka Fleischer's home, in the area near where you live, probably half a mile or so away. And I was invited for Shabbat, and it was a very moving experience. And so that Torah portion, since that would be coming up this Shabbat, it would be a year ago. So you're coming up to the Torah portion again. You go in a cycle each year. And the Torah portion was Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers.
Right.
And you were mentioning, and I don't want you to reveal too much about, I know you're writing an article about it, but if you could just share a little bit about some of the thoughts that you have, and then I would encourage people to go, would the article be up at genesis123.co?
I don't put my personal writing at Genesis123. Typically, you can Google Jonathan Feldstein Town Hall. Town Hall's published, I think, all but 2 of my articles, which have been too religious. Townhall.com, All Israel News, Christian Headlines. They're the ones that have been publishing a lot of my stuff recently.
Okay. All Israel
Um,
is Joel Rosenberg's group.
All Israel News is Joel Rosenberg. Yeah. So my son on the secular calendar, his 25th birthday is tomorrow. He will be celebrating that in Gaza. Thank God we also celebrate the biblical calendar, so we got to bring him dinner last week on his base, and that was special and important for us all, because we knew at that point he was already going to be going into Gaza. But because this is the week, this is his bar mitzvah Torah portion. He read it 12 years ago in our synagogue on Shabbat. And well, the beautiful thing about how we read the Torah with this annual cycle is that every year you're a year older. Every year you're in a different place in life. And every year God's word speaks to us. Even though the words are the same, it speaks to us differently because we're in a different place in life. And again, if we're not looking at that, if we're not getting something new, then we're also not doing that right. So this year, I had a profound realization. And yes, I'm writing something about it. It's not done yet. For the first time in my life, I'm turning 59 years old. I've been around this cycle a few times. I'm looking at this Torah portion not through the eyes of Joseph. Well, how bad was it that your brothers threw you in a pit and then sold you off to slavery, and you showed up and then you were redeemed and you're imprisoned and then redeemed and become prime minister and everything that goes on. I'm looking at it through the eyes of Jacob, the man who grieved what he said his most loved son, that he believed his son was dead. I don't believe my son is dead. I believe my son is doing what he needs to do and is coming back, and we pray for that. But I'm looking at the complete lack of control that I have, because no matter how old we are, if we have children, our job is always to protect them and to be in their lives. And now I can't do anything. Now I can pray. I raised him to be in this situation, and I'm proud of him. I'm so proud. Yeah, it's real emotional to think about it, to be honest.
It does give you a different perspective on the Torah, the scripture.
What was Jacob thinking for 17 years that his son was in Egypt and he thought his son was dead? What was he thinking? How did he function? And I'm not drawing that analogy. My son's not dead. He's in combat. He's coming back, right. and he's doing what he was raised for and what he's trained for. And I'm proud of that.
I wish people could understand too that, having been there, and I love Hebron, and of course Yishai is very involved with that, and so you live in this area that's so important to Christians in the biblical story, because none of what we believe makes sense without what happened in that area, or what happened at Shechem, or what happened at Hebron, and that type of thing. And it's I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. Is there anything, we'll obviously have to do this on a semi-regular basis if we can arrange it, but is there anything that Christians can do here in America? I know a lot of people were asking questions really while the news was still flying on October 7th. And I woke up and just happened to check my phone, and I thought, oh no. I mean, that on October 7th was about 12:30 a.m. And I don't think I slept more than an hour or two over the next 2 days. And the numbers were hard. It was 100 dead and this missing, and then it was 10 hostages, then a couple hundred, and it's just been a flood of information. But a lot of Christians were asking me, what can we do to help? If there are places that we can go to contribute monetarily, and then also if you would ask us or tell us as we finish up here, maybe some ways that we can pray.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you're asking about that. First of all, that was the most important thing. That's why I started the Genesis 1-2-3 Foundation, in order that everything not be about monetary relationships. We need real relationships, not transactional relationships. All of what I'm doing and ways to contact me can be done through genesis123.co. Financially, we launched on the first day an Israel emergency campaign, and we're doing very, very impactful things with integrity. That's for me the most important, that if someone's entrusting me with $1, and I am so touched at how many people have donated $1 and $2. And a woman from California once called and apologized. I don't know where she came up with this number, but she only donated $3.44. And she called me to apologize. I said, "Are you kidding me? Every dollar matters, and you're giving me the opportunity to thank you in person by calling me." So how wonderful that was, because we've had thousands of donations from $1 on up, and I want to thank everybody for doing that. But please, at Genesis 123 Foundation, Genesis123.co, you can donate, and I will share, and I do share frequently about the high impact ways that we're really making a difference. We have a petition that I'm begging people to sign. We need tens of thousands at least of names to give Israel the backing to continue the battle and to rescue the hostages without getting pressure from the West. And I think the more signatures that we get and then present those to the United Nations and the Red Cross and the G7 and all of the countries, more than 24 countries that had hostages taken on October 7th, we need to give Israel the backing. And that's the nature of that petition, also available at Genesis123.co. I did this by accident before, but I realized we're selling these bracelets that say "Bring them home now." That's also available on our website, that people can even, I forget that I'm wearing it, but it's important. It's bright yellow, and we have to at least have that momentary. I don't have it online, but it was published as an article in a number of places, and anyone who wants to reach out to me, tomorrow is the first day of Hanukkah. We launched something that's gone wild. I'm so thrilled. With 8 prayer points for the 8 nights of Hanukkah, and calling on Christians to put a candle. The press release and the articles that have come out explain all of this from a Jewish tradition, why we light our Hanukkah menorah and put them in the windows, because we're celebrating God. We're celebrating the miracles. We're in the season of miracles now, and we need more miracles. So we have an 8-point prayer plan that we're asking on Christians to light a candle and pray publicly and make videos praying, because we need to, as much as Hanukkah is a holiday of lights, and light overcomes the darkness, one little flame overcomes the darkness. We need to flood the world with light. We need to flood the world with prayer, and we need to flood God's inbox to remind him that even though we know he's in control, that he knows that we know that he's in control, that he knows that we know that he's in control, right? And that and that we want him to know that we are his partners. We are his willing partners. We are his gracious partners. We are his grateful partners. And honestly, I don't even remember what all the prayer points are, but we need it all. So people can contact me, and I'll be glad, or Google Jonathan Feldstein Hanukkah miracles, and I think you'll come up with the article.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate this, and the next time we'll talk, I promise to let you go. And I'm so distressed. I mean, we when we were talking privately beforehand, we talked a little bit about this ridiculous statements of these elite educational institutions in Congress yesterday not being able to respond to a direct question about whether calling for the genocide of Jews is a violation of their hate and bullying policy. And what can we, just give us like one word in passing or in leaving? Would you like to see us respond to these anti-Semitic attacks?
With truth, with aggressive truth, not passive. That needs activism. That needs more than prayer. That needs action behind prayer. And anywhere you see it, anywhere it hints, anywhere you get a smell of it, call it out. Call it out for what it is. It's anti-Semitism. Anytime someone holds Israel to a double standard that they wouldn't hold anyone else to, that's anti-Semitism. Anyone who doesn't call out massive sexual violence and crimes that took place against Israeli women, and it takes the UN 2 months to do so, that is anti-Semitism, and it just needs to be called out. So I pray that people who are following and listening and watching this will follow you, John, because you're such an important voice, and use that moral clarity to call it out everywhere.
Okay. Well, listen, Jonathan, thank you so much. We will keep you, your family, your son, your son-in-law, daughter, your family and everything, the community there in our prayers, and look forward to doing this again. So as I'm leaving, I will tell everybody I may be live again at noon. Brian Schrager,
Good.
a friend of mine who, I don't know if you know Brian,
Of course,
Jonathan.
also fun.
I'm going to be interviewing him at noon Eastern time. At least that's the plan. So in about 20 minutes or so, I should be back on with his perspective of what he's seen. So Jonathan, God bless, and thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining us
God
today.
bless
And
you.
everybody,
Anytime, John. Anytime. It's a
okay.
pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Bye now.
Bye.